Hello, friend, and welcome to Inside the Dark. Thank you for joining me. A brutal murder, an eyewitness, a confession, and a guilty verdict. And a killer who ultimately walked free out of a courthouse in Ventura County, California on January 23rd, 2024. How? Well, my friend, I'll tell you. But you might want to sit down for this one. Get comfortable. Pour yourself a stiff drink. Light up a smoke, if that's your thing. Or better yet, maybe not. In 2018, a woman named Bryn Spacher took her dog to a dog park where she met Chad O'Melia, who was there with his dog also. They got along, they liked each other, and they started dating. They had only been dating a few weeks when Bryn took her dog over to Chad's apartment in Thousand Oaks, where he lived with his two roommates, around 10 p.m., the night before Memorial Day. Now, this portion of the story comes from an interview Chad's roommate, Vinny Oliveira, gave to the media, along with statements given to the media by Bryn's mother. Vinny told Thousand Oaks Acorn News that he remembers when Chad told him he met Bryn. He said, "Chad came to me and told me he met this girl, and she was amazing. You've got to meet her," he said. Vinny said Chad talked about Bryn all the time. Police said Bryn told them they were dating. But that's not what Bryn's mother told reporters. She told them there was no romantic interest on Bryn's part, and she just wanted to be friends. Vinny told reporters about the night before Memorial Day in 2018, when he got home from work and saw Chad, Bryn, and their two dogs at the apartment. He said they were sitting in the living room talking, and he talked with them for a bit before he went upstairs to take a shower. He said they looked like they were having a good time, and everything seemed all right. But when he got out of the shower, he said he laid on his bed and started looking through his phone when he heard noises coming from downstairs. First, he said he heard loud talking. Then, he heard things breaking. That really got his attention. So, he decided to go downstairs to see what was going on. When he got to the landing on the stairs, he said he saw something strange. He saw the two dogs there together, looking frightened. He continued down the stairs and saw furniture tipped over in the living room, including the couch, which was also covered in blood. Then he said he saw Chad, wounded, also covered in blood. He said he saw a hole in Chad's chest where his heart was, and as he looked at him in horror, Chad begged him, "Vinny, Vinny, please help me. She stabbed me." Then he said he saw Bryn standing near Chad, holding a knife. He said she looked at him with a blank stare, and he said, "Bryn, what the blank are you doing? What's going on?" He said he turned and ran back upstairs to get his phone to call 911 for help, and when he ran back downstairs, he saw that Chad had fallen to the floor and Bryn was crouched over him, stabbing him repeatedly. So he ran outside to call 911, fearing for his life, but thinking calling for help was the only way he might save Chad's. He said police arrived quickly, and even though he felt he went into a state of shock over what he had witnessed, he said he could hear their stun guns being used inside the apartment. Bryn was taken away in an ambulance, and Chad was pronounced dead at the scene. He had been stabbed 108 times. Bryn was taken to the hospital for self-inflicted wounds to her neck, deep cuts on her hand, and a broken hand believed to have been the result of police hitting her multiple times with their batons to attempt to get her to drop the knife. She underwent surgery for her wounds, and after she was released from the hospital, she was arrested and charged with Chad's murder. But because she had no previous criminal record, she was allowed to bond out of jail, which not only tore Chad's family up, but also made life hard for Chad's roommate Vinny, who didn't feel comfortable even living in Thousand Oaks anymore. He said that knowing Bryn was out of jail scared him after seeing what she did to his friend, and knowing she knew he witnessed the murder. He said he lost his home and had to relocate, and the flashbacks of that night still haunt him years later. He told reporters that every time he sees a knife, he sees it all again in his mind. He said Chad had so many plans and goals, and instead of getting to go after them, he was stabbed 108 times. And he can't get that out of his head. He said it's not something he'll ever forget, and he just wanted to put it behind him. But it would be a long time before Vinny would get to put it behind him. Court records show Bryn's trial would be delayed 20 times until it was finally scheduled to take place in late 2023. So, for over 5 years, 5 years, Chad's killer has been free to live her life. But Chad wasn't. And Vinny and Chad's family had to live with that, with knowing Bryn was free and Chad was gone. But Chad's loved ones didn't have a choice, and all they could do day after day for 5 years was pray for justice. Justice that would never come. And not only was the wait excruciating, but the case also took some surprising turns that Chad's loved ones could have in no way ever anticipated. After the brutal murder, the number one question on everyone's minds had to be, why? What the hell happened in that apartment that night? Because Vinny had no clue. He said everything was fine when he went up to his room to shower. So the only two people who knew what led up to the murder were Chad and Bryn. And Chad wasn't alive anymore to give his side of the story. So Bryn's story was all the police and the prosecution had to go on. And she had a hell of a story to tell. She claimed Chad forced her to take a hit off a bong they were smoking, and the hit she took threw her into a weed-induced psychosis that caused her to believe she had died. And she heard voices in her head that told her if she killed Chad, she'd come back to life. Now, don't you even think about clicking off this video without at least giving it a like first. That's only fair after I've brought you this far. But if you've heard enough at this point, I get it. And I don't blame you. Because it's only going to get worse from here. Much worse. And I certainly don't need you going off in my comments about how weed-induced psychosis isn't a thing. Not that I wouldn't believe you. But the experts in this case would say you're wrong. And they must have been pretty convincing, because they even made the prosecutor believe it's a thing, which caused them to rethink Bryn's second-degree murder charge, which was punishable by up to 25 years in prison, and reduce it to a charge of involuntary manslaughter instead. Punishable in the state of California by up to only 4 years in prison. So not only did Chad's loved ones have to wait an excruciating 5+ years to see some sort of justice for his brutal murder, but then they were told that it really wouldn't be much justice at all.
For the victim's family, hearing about this change in the charge from second-degree murder, 25 years, down to involuntary manslaughter, maybe 4, they said it felt like an ambush. You can imagine what it would be like sitting in a courtroom going through all of this. Sean O'Melia knows what it's like. He's Chad's father, and he joins me live now for his first national interview. Sean, thank you, first of all, so much for being on tonight. And please, can I just offer you my sincere condolences to what you've gone through and what your family's gone through in losing Chad, but then also going through what you're going through now. And that is the politics of the criminal justice system and the suffering of having to live through a trial as a family member. So let's just start there with understanding how difficult this is for you. Let me ask you your thoughts on the prosecution of this case to start with.
Okay. Well, first of all, Ashley, thank you for having me this evening. The prosecution of the case, after seeing and hearing most of what I've heard, they notified our family about a month before they were going to change the charges from second-degree murder to involuntary manslaughter. They did notify us of that, and we were opposed to it. We feel that there was enough information in their hands to actually maintain that charge, and we had a meeting, discussed it, and they continued in the direction that they are going in now with involuntary manslaughter.
I can imagine that is extremely painful for you and your family, not feeling like you have a say, because often, the way it works is prosecutors are the attorneys for the victims' family members and loved ones. So it's upsetting to hear that that wasn't a feeling that your family agreed with and that they went ahead with it. Did they give you good reasons, or did they at least give you reasons that made any sense, even if you disagreed with them?
They did their best to try to explain it. I obviously have access to my own attorneys and my own counsel, and, they have their opinion on the evidence that's there. And when you review something like this and somebody's claim is, well, I was unconscious when I performed the act, and then they're able to give a statement that tells what happened, that in itself demonstrates that there was a level of consciousness that was there. Now, what level of consciousness, I can't even speak to that. I'm not a doctor. But I would say that it's her own words and statement that the people I reviewed it with, the attorneys I reviewed it with, said that there really is enough information here to leave the charges as they are. But again, one thing you learn about this is that the DA's office has control of the case. The defense can change their attorneys anytime, but the prosecution, we have no say over who does what, and they proceed with the charges that they feel that they can get a conviction on.
Sean, I have about a minute left, but I do want to ask, was there a bad relationship between Bryn and Chad? Was there any other motive that you can imagine would have been the reason for this, if not for what she says was just a complete psychotic break and a snap?
No. It seemed to me from all of the information that I've heard, all the testimony I've heard, that they were getting along just fine. It was very, very early on. They had just met each other about 3 weeks ago, so the relationship hadn't run its course or gotten very far into it at all. But no, there was no fighting or arguing or anything like that. They were both, professional people. My son was an accountant. She was an audiologist. So they both had bright futures. They really did.
Sean, it's so perplexing, and I can't stress enough how sorry I am that you're going through this. We'll continue to follow this, and maybe you and I can speak again when the trial runs its course and the jury gives its verdict. Can we do that?
Yes, thank you for letting me speak tonight.
So even though Chad's family didn't agree with the reduced charge, the prosecution decided to go ahead with it anyway, because the defense had the handy-dandy body cam footage from that night that has not been released, that they say showed Bryn screaming while holding the knife while crouched over Chad's bleeding body and stabbing herself in the throat. They said it also showed the amount of force police needed to use to disarm Bryn, and they had the toxicology results from having Chad's bong tested, along with the remaining burned weed left in it, that showed the presence of THC, but no other substance at all in what remained, meaning it wasn't laced with anything. It was just straight up weed. So, their expert determined the video clearly depicted Bryn in a psychotic state that must have been induced by the weed she smoked. Arguable? Not so fast. Because after reviewing the body cam video, the prosecution's expert witness agreed with the defense. Their expert also said the video clearly depicted Bryn in a psychotic state that must have been induced from hitting the bong. So the prosecutor went with the opinions of the expert witnesses and decided to agree with the defense that Bryn was indeed in a weed-induced psychosis when she committed the murder, leaving the jury to decide if she voluntarily smoked, causing the psychosis, or if she was forced to smoke. Why does that matter? Well, as the prosecutor explained it in her opening statement, and I wish I had the video to show you, but from what I understand, cameras weren't allowed in the courtroom. She said, quote, "The law says when someone voluntarily ingests an intoxicant and bad things happen, like a DUI, the person responsible is the person who voluntarily ingests the intoxicant and does the bad thing. We don't get to blame other people when we do something bad because we wanted to get high." So if the prosecution could prove Bryn voluntarily smoked because she wanted to get high, even though they already determined that she didn't intend to kill Chad, boom, involuntary manslaughter. But if the defense could prove she didn't want to get high and Chad somehow forced her to, well, that's a different story. I bet at this point you think the defense proved she didn't want to get high and Chad forced her to. And that's why she didn't get any jail time. Am I right? Who am I kidding? Of course I'm right. But you, my friend, are not. With all my rambling on, you must have forgotten that I already told you in the beginning that there was a confession and a guilty verdict. But it probably didn't help that I followed up with, "She also walked free as well." Which is more than likely why you're yelling at your screen right now, telling me I can't have it both ways. Oh, really now? Why can't I? Bryn did. Bryn's trial started on November 11th of 2023, and she chose to take the stand and testify. And when she did, she told the jury she only took 2 hits from Chad's bong that night. The first one, she took voluntarily. But the second hit that induced the psychosis, she claimed Chad forced her to take. So, she had it both ways. Which left the jury to determine what? Which hit they believe she took voluntarily and which she might not have? And which hit was the one that induced the psychosis that caused her to kill? And can you imagine how Chad's loved ones felt after everything they had already gone through? Every hit they had already taken. Sitting in that courtroom listening to that? That not only were they not going to receive anywhere close to the justice that they and Chad deserved for his brutal murder, but that any piddly justice that they may receive would come down to a psychosis that may or may not even be real, and the jury's ability to determine whether or not Bryn was telling the truth about Chad forcing her to take the hit that caused it. And just for the record, experts claim that cannabis induced psychosis is real. If I was sitting on that jury, I would have been a hard one. A hard one to sell that to, experts or not. I would have been insulted that I was asked to determine whether or not a grown woman was forced to take a hit from a bong when she didn't want to, without adding that he held her down, blew it in her face, tied her up, or otherwise kept her from just picking up and leaving the situation. But we didn't hear anything like that at all. Despite the defense's best efforts to blame Bryn's psychotic break on Chad, and even after hearing the expert witnesses and seeing that horrific police body cam video, they found Bryn guilty of involuntary manslaughter in December of 2023. After 5 long years, numerous setbacks, and many disappointments, Chad's family would finally get some justice, however small. And even though the verdict only allowed for a sentence of up to 4 years in prison under California state law, the judge had the ability to consider adding enhancements, which would allow him to add more years to her sentence, which had to be music to Chad's family's ears. Bryn would finally see the inside of a prison cell, instead of continuing to live her life freely on the outside. So, you can imagine his family's utter shock and heartbreak at Bryn's sentencing just 1 month later, after they learned that the judge did consider enhancements for Bryn's sentencing, but concluded that even though she was armed with a weapon while committing her involuntary manslaughter, he didn't believe it to be a deadly weapon, even though she killed Chad with it. And he also did not find it to be true that she killed Chad during the commission of a felony. So I guess felonious assault is no longer a thing, at least for that judge, anyway.
Today, the judge took up a series of things that we in the business like to call enhancements. It's like a fancy name for, ooh, but you did something extra. And that could make the relatively paltry sentence not so paltry, like a lot longer. I'm going to give you the list here. The judge decided that it's true that Spacer, quote, engaged in violent conduct, and true that the crime involved great violence, and true, Spacer was armed with and used a weapon. But he ruled that it was not true that she used a deadly weapon. That one I'm struggling with quite a bit because it was very deadly when it killed her victim. And the judge also said not true that she killed Chad O'Melia while committing a serious felony. I'll have to think that one through a little bit.
So, a no-go on any sentence enhancements. Now, I know you find it surprising that the judge decided that the knife Bryn used during the commission of her involuntary manslaughter was not a deadly weapon, much as I myself did. But I have to wonder which knife he was talking about, and why he didn't determine whether the other 3 knives she claimed she used during her testimony were considered deadly or not. I mean, they say the devil's in the details, right? Oh, wait. Did I forget to mention that she testified she got 4 knives from the knife block in the kitchen, threw 2 at Chad, and then specifically remembered using the other 2 to stab him with? Dear Lord. And here I am going on about the judge leaving out important details. My apologies. But that wasn't all Bryn revealed during her testimony. She informed the jury that she had a very vivid recollection of the hallucinations she experienced during her psychotic break that night, and described them in great detail, as she said she saw them, as though she were watching a movie. Thank you for joining me for part 1 of this episode of Inside the Dark. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when I post part 2, including Bryn Spacher's testimony, the reaction to her sentencing, and an interview with Bryn Spacher herself that you won't want to miss, that I refer to as the Dead Doll Eye interview.